You imagine selling your startup for $15 million is when your family finally hugs you with pride. But they didn't embrace me to say congratulations. They held on to measure the weight of my pockets. The moment I walked through that door, I realized they didn't see a daughter anymore. They saw a safe with legs. I didn't lose my family when I became poor. I lost them the exact second I became their paycheck. My name is Alice Morris, and at 34 years old, I learned that every price tag comes with a hidden tax. I am not talking about the IRS or state levies. I am talking about the tax of blood. You grow up thinking that if you work hard enough, if you bleed enough into your keyboard and sacrifice enough sleep, you will eventually reach the mountaintop where everything is calm and beautiful. I reached that peak on a Tuesday afternoon. It cost me exactly $15 million to get there, but the $15 million did not make me rich first. It made me an orphan. It cost me my entire family in the span of a single evening. I had just sold my company. It was a logistics and artificial intelligence firm designed to optimize supply chains for mid-sized manufacturers. It does not sound sexy, and it certainly was not glamorous when I was coding in a windowless room for 18 hours a day, eating cold takeout and forgetting what the sun looked like. But a major conglomerate saw the code, saw the client list, and decided they wanted it. The deal took 8 months of due diligence, lawyers picking through my life, and endless negotiations. When the wire transfer finally hit my account, I stared at the screen. $15 million. It was just a number. It did not feel like freedom yet. It felt like I could finally sleep for a week. I had not even closed my laptop when my phone rang. It was my mother, Diane. Her voice was tight, pitched high in that specific frequency that usually signals a catastrophe. She told me I needed to come home to Westbridge immediately. She said there was something important happening, something the whole family needed to be present for. She did not say the words cancer or heart attack, but the implication hung heavy in the silence between her sentences. She said everyone was waiting for me. My stomach dropped. The joy of the sale, the relief of financial security, it all evaporated. I immediately thought of my father, Howard. He had been complaining about chest pains vaguely for years, the kind of complaints men of his generation make to avoid going to a doctor. I thought of my sister, Brianna. Brianna was 30, 4 years younger than me, and her life was a series of chaotic loops. Maybe she was in trouble again. Maybe she had crashed another car or needed bail. I booked the first flight out. I did not even shower. I grabbed a bag, threw in some clothes, and headed to the airport. During the 3-hour flight to Pennsylvania, I stared out the window at the clouds and felt a strange, pathetic hope rising in my chest. I thought that maybe, just maybe, this was not a tragedy. Maybe they had heard the news about the sale. Maybe they wanted to throw me a surprise party. I imagined my dad hugging me, actually hugging me, and saying he was proud that I had built something from nothing. I imagined my mom cooking my favorite pot roast, and Brianna actually asking me how I was doing without immediately pivoting the conversation to her own drama. I rented a car at the airport and drove to Westbridge. It is a small town, the kind of place where nothing changes except the seasons. I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home. The lawn was perfectly manicured. The house looked exactly the same as it had when I left for college 17 years ago. I took a deep breath, braced myself for whatever medical news or crisis awaited, and unlocked the front door. I expected a hospital bed in the living room. I expected tears. I expected chaos. What I found was a boardroom, the dining room table, usually reserved for Thanksgiving and Christmas, had been transformed. The lace tablecloth was gone, replaced by a stark, protective plastic cover, and on top of it, the scene was terrifyingly organized. There were 3 thick binders. There was a portable printer plugged into the wall outlet. There were stacks of legal pads, sticky notes in neon yellow and pink, and a row of highlighters lined up with military precision. My father, Howard, was sitting at the head of the table. He stood up when I entered. He was wearing a button-down shirt, tucked in, which he never did inside the house unless it was a holiday. He smiled at me, But it was not the warm smile of a father seeing his daughter. It was the smile of a bank manager greeting a high-net-worth client. It was measured. It was polite. It was cold. "Alice," he said, gesturing to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table. "You made good time." My sister, Brianna, was there too. She rushed over to me before I could even set my bag down. Brianna was usually distant, or she was frantic. Today, she was soft. She wrapped her arms around me and held on for a long time. Too long. It felt performative. It felt like she was checking to see if I was real. Or perhaps she was unconsciously patting me down. She smelled like expensive vanilla perfume, a scent I knew she could not afford. "We missed you so much, Ali," she whispered against my ear. My mother, Diane, walked in from the kitchen. She was not carrying food. She was carrying a pitcher of water and 4 glasses, like she was catering a corporate retreat. Her face was set in a mask of serious purpose. "Sit down, honey," Mom said. Her voice was calm, authoritative. "We have a lot to get through tonight." I looked at the binders. I looked at the printer. I looked at the way my family was positioned around the table, creating a triangle of unity that excluded me. The air in the room did not smell like dinner. It smelled like ozone and copier paper. "Is Dad okay?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "You sounded like it was an emergency." "Dad is fine," Mom said, waving her hand dismissively. "We are all fine. Better than fine. Actually, but we need to discuss the future. Your future. And the family's future." That was the moment the trap snapped shut. I looked at Brianna. She was back in her seat, her hands folded on top of a blue binder, looking at me with big expectant eyes. I looked at my father, who was uncapping a pen. I suddenly realized that the urgency, the phone call, the vague threat of a crisis, it was all a strategy to get me into this room. They knew I would not come back for a casual chat about money. They knew I would only drop everything if I thought they were hurt. They had weaponized my own empathy against me. I stood there, gripping the back of the chair. I realized then that they did not see me as a daughter, or a sister, or a person who had just achieved a monumental life goal after a decade of crushing labor. They saw me as an asset. They saw me as a resource to be managed. I do not know if you have ever walked into a room expecting love and found a negotiation instead. It does something to your heart. It turns the blood cold. I looked at the binders again. I could see tabs sticking out of them. I squinted and read one of the handwritten labels on Brianna's binder. It said, "Allocation Strategy." I felt a laugh bubbling up in my throat, but it was a hysterical, dark thing. I swallowed it down. I realized that what they had prepared was not a dinner. It was not a celebration. It was a sentencing hearing. They had already held the trial in my absence, found me guilty of having more than them, and determined the penalty. If you have ever been the strong one in your family, the one who fixes the flat tires, the one who pays for the funerals, the one who answers the phone at 3 a.m, you will understand exactly what I felt in that moment. You will understand why I did not sit down, and you will understand why, eventually. I had to close the door. Growing up, my sister and I were assigned roles before we were old enough to understand the script. I was the self-cleaning oven. I was the low-maintenance model. I was the child who figured out how to tie her shoes because she got tired of waiting for someone to help her. Brianna, on the other hand, was the perpetual emergency. She was the one who needed saving, and in the Morris household, needing saving was the only way to get attention. There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes with being the capable child. You learn very early on that your parents' bandwidth is finite, and if your sister is consuming 90% of it, you have to survive on the remaining 10. I did not just survive on it, I built a fortress on it. By the time I was 16, I was filling out my own financial aid forms. I was researching scholarships. I was booking my own dentist appointments. When I came home with straight A's, my parents would nod absently and say, "That is great. Honey, it was expected. It was the baseline." But if Brianna managed to turn in a homework assignment on time, it was treated like a divine miracle. They would put it on the fridge. They would take her out for ice cream to celebrate her breakthrough. I remember the summer I turned 17. It is the data point I always return to when I try to explain our family dynamic to therapists. I had spent 3 months fixing broken laptops for neighbors and small businesses in town. My fingers were constantly stained with thermal paste, and my eyes burned from staring at circuit boards late into the night. I had scraped together $2,000. I was so proud. I was going to use it to buy a reliable used car so I could drive myself to college interviews. 2 weeks before school started, Brianna totaled the family sedan. She had been driving too fast on a wet road. Allegedly because she was stressed about a boy. She was unhurt. Thank God. But the car was a wreck. I expected a lecture. I expected consequences. Instead, my parents sat me down at the kitchen table. They told me that Brianna was fragile right now. They told me she needed a safe vehicle to get to school, or her anxiety would spiral. They asked me to loan them my $2,000 to help put a down payment on a newer, safer SUV for her. They called it a loan, but we all knew what it was. It was a tax. I handed over the money because that is what the strong one does. I took the bus for the next 2 years. Brianna drove a car with heated seats. When I left for the Ridgemont Institute of Technology, I felt like I was escaping a gravity well. I lived in a dorm room the size of a closet. I worked 20 hours a week in the computer lab, fixing server errors and helping freshmen reset their passwords. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner more nights than I care to admit. I never asked for a dime. I wanted to prove that I did not need their resources to survive. Meanwhile, Brianna enrolled at Valley State College. Or rather, she enrolled in the idea of college. First, she was going to be a graphic designer. Then she dropped that because the professors were too critical. Then she switched to psychology because she wanted to understand people, but she quit that because the reading list was too heavy. Then she took a semester off to find herself. Every time she quit, my parents had a narrative ready. Brianna is just a free spirit, my mother would say. She is too creative for that rigid environment, my father would insist. They paid her rent. They paid for her meal plan. They paid for the yoga teacher training she started and never finished. I stopped calling home as much during my junior year. I realized that every conversation followed the same flowchart. I would say hello, and within 30 seconds, the topic would pivot to Brianna. Brianna was depressed. Brianna had a toxic boss who did not understand her genius. Brianna needed to move apartments because her roommate had bad energy. I became a dumping ground for their anxiety about her. They would vent to me, draining my emotional battery, and then hang up, feeling better while I was left staring at my calculus textbook. Exhausted, I tried to tell them once. I said that maybe if they stopped catching her every time she fell, she would learn how to stand up. My mother looked at me with genuine disappointment. She told me I was being hard-hearted. She said I was lucky to be born with thick skin, and I should have more compassion for those who were not. That was the narrative. I was the oak tree, and she was the orchid. I was designed to weather the storm, and she was designed to be sheltered from it. But the truth is, I do not hate my sister. I really do not. She can be funny and charming when she is not in crisis mode. The problem was never her personality. The problem was the system my parents built around her, a system where my success was a public utility, something they could tap into whenever they wanted. While her failures were natural disasters that required federal aid, I graduated with honors and no debt because I worked myself to the bone. Brianna eventually finished a general studies degree after 6 years and immediately moved back into her old bedroom. By the time I started my company, I had accepted my role. I was the backup generator. I was the person they called when the lights went out. I sent money for birthdays. I sent money when the water heater broke. I sent money when Brianna needed a fresh start in a new city, which happened every 18 months like clockwork. I did it because it was easier to write a check than to have the argument. I convinced myself that this was love. I told myself that providing for them was my way of participating in the family, since I could not participate in their drama, but sitting in that dining room, looking at the binders and the highlighters, I realized I had made a critical calculation error. I thought I was being generous. They thought I was being compliant. I thought I was giving gifts. They thought I was paying rent for the privilege of being related to them. I looked at Brianna across the table. She was wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget in college. She looked soft and protected. And for the first time, I looked at my parents not as benevolent guardians, but as managers of a failing asset who had just found a new investor. I had spent my entire life being the person who gave. I was used to being the safety net. I was used to being the strong one. I was used to being the provider. I just was not used to being demanded. I did not start Root Nest because I wanted to be a tycoon. I started it because I was working for a mid-tier transport software firm, and I saw something that drove me crazy. We were servicing the giants, the companies with fleets of 5,000 trucks. But the little guys, the family-owned distributors, the local couriers, were flying blind. They were running their entire operations on Excel spreadsheets and whiteboards. They had no idea where their inventory was until the driver actually called them. They were bleeding cash and fuel and lost hours, and nobody was building tools for them because they were considered low yield. I saw a gap. I saw a hemorrhage of efficiency that I could stitch up with the right code. So I quit my job. I moved into a cheaper apartment, a studio with bad heating and worse water pressure, and I turned my dining table into a command center. For the first 18 months, Root Nest was just me. I was the chief technology officer, the sales department, the customer support agent, and the janitor. I wrote Python scripts at 3 a.m. and answered support tickets at 7. I lived on caffeine and adrenaline. The first year was not a rocket launch. It was a car crash. I landed a regional logistics partner. My first real contract. I thought I had made it. Then, a botched API integration on my end caused their dispatch system to go dark for 6 hours on a Monday. Drivers were stranded. Deliveries were missed. They fired me before lunch. I lost 80% of my projected revenue in a single phone call. I sat on my floor, staring at a bank balance that was dipping into the red, and I made the mistake of calling my mother for moral support. I told her I was terrified. I told her I might have to break my lease. There was a pause on the line. Then she sighed, that heavy, disappointed exhale that I knew so well. "Alice," she said, "why do you do this to yourself? Uncle Jerry says the county clerk's office is hiring. It has a pension. It has dental. Why don't you just get a real job and stop playing with computers?" She did not offer help. She did not offer comfort. She offered me a surrender flag. That phone call did more to motivate me than any business book ever could. I was not going to be the failure they expected me to be. I was not going to be Brianna. I wiped my face, drank a glass of water, and went back to the code. That was when I found Marissa Cole. She was a retired supply chain executive I met at a desperate networking event where I was trying to eat as many free appetizers as possible. I pitched her my broken, half-baked idea between mouthfuls of stale crackers. She did not pity me. She grilled me. She told me my pricing model was garbage and my user interface looked like it was designed by a Soviet engineer. But she also wrote me a check. It was not a huge check, but it was enough to keep the lights on. She became my mentor. She taught me that I was not building a piece of software. I was building a machine that printed efficiency. She taught me how to hire. She taught me how to say no to bad clients. By year 3, Root Nest had turned a corner. We were generating real revenue. I hired 6 people, 4 developers, a salesperson, and a customer success manager. We moved out of my apartment and into a shared co-working space that smelled like roasted coffee and ambition. I worked 14, sometimes 16 hours a day. I missed Thanksgiving 2 years in a row because our server load spiked during the holiday rush and I had to babysit the database. I missed my cousin's wedding. I missed the family reunion where everyone wore matching t-shirts. My family did not understand. To them, my absence was not a sacrifice for a future payoff. It was an insult. They did not see the work. They only saw the distance. And yet, they called. They called with a frequency that increased in direct proportion to my perceived stability. But they never called to ask how the beta launch was going. They never called to ask if I had slept that week. "Brianna is having a hard time with her rent," my dad would say, his voice low, as if sharing a state secret. "She is between opportunities right now. Can you spot her $2,000 just until next month? Mom and I are a little tight on the property tax this year," my mom would mention casually. Since you have that company now, maybe you could handle it? That company was how they referred to the entity that consumed my entire existence. It was spoken of like a hobby that had accidentally become profitable. I started to push back. I was running a business, and I started applying business logic to my family. If Brianna needed money, I wanted to see a budget. If I gave them a loan, I wanted a repayment schedule written down. I did not care about the interest. I cared about the principle. I cared about accountability. They hated it. I remember one specific blowout. Brianna needed $4,000 for a certification course that she swore would change her career trajectory. I told her I would pay the school directly, but I would not put cash in her account. She exploded. She told our parents that I was controlling. She said I was treating her like a charity case instead of a sister. "You are so calculating, Alice," my mother told me later. "Everything is a transaction with you. You have lost your heart." That label stuck. Calculating, cold, stingy. It did not matter that I paid the bills. It mattered that I asked questions before signing the check. They wanted the resource without the reality check. They wanted the ATM to dispense cash without asking for a PIN. Then came the Tuesday that changed everything. It was a gray, rainy afternoon. I was in the middle of a sprint review with my lead developer when a notification popped up on my laptop. It was an email from a conglomerate I had been flirting with for 6 months. The subject line was bland. Letter of intent, acquisition proposal. I clicked it open. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I scrolled past the legal jargon, past the clauses about non-competes and asset transfers, until I hit the paragraph that mattered. The number was bolded. I froze. The office noise, the clicking keyboards, the murmur of sales calls, faded into a dull hum. I stared at the digits. I counted the zeros. I counted them again just to be sure I was not having a stroke or a hallucination. $15 million. It was a cash offer, no stock options, no complicated earnouts that would trap me for 5 years. Just a clean, brutal, life-altering sum of money. $15 million for the sleepless nights. $15 million for the missed weddings. $15 million for the panic attacks and the ramen noodles and the years of being told I should just get a job at the post office. My hands started to shake. I had to grip the edge of my desk to steady myself. I felt a wave of nausea, followed by a rush of adrenaline so potent it made me dizzy. I did not call my boyfriend. I did not call Marissa. My first instinct, the one hardwired into me by 3 decades of conditioning, was to call my family. I wanted to scream. I did it. I wanted to prove them wrong. I wanted to show them that the calculating daughter had just calculated her way to freedom. But then I remembered the dining room table. I remembered the loans that never came back. I remembered the guilt trips, and I hesitated. I closed the laptop. I took a breath. I did not know it yet. But that email was not just an exit strategy for my business. It was the entrance exam for the hardest fight of my life. The money was real, but the cost was going to be so much higher than $15 million. The night I signed the final papers was the quietest night of my life. You expect fireworks. You expect to feel like a character in a movie montage, popping champagne and dancing on a table. But when the electronic signature went through, and the notification confirmed the transfer was pending, I was sitting alone in a steakhouse in downtown Seattle. I had ordered a bottle of Cabernet that cost $300, simply because I could, but I could not bring myself to drink more than a glass. I looked around the room at the couples laughing and the businessmen closing deals, and I felt a profound sense of dislocation. I did not feel ecstatic. I felt light, but in a terrifying way, like an astronaut who has just been untethered from the ship. The burden of the last 7 years, the payroll anxiety, the server crashes, the fear of failure, was gone. It was just gone. It was like I had been carrying a boulder up a mountain every single day, and I had finally put it down. My muscles were still twitching from the effort, bracing for a weight that was no longer there. I poked at my steak and thought about calling someone. But who? My team was already celebrating at a dive bar, and I wanted to let them have their moment without the boss hovering. Marissa was in Europe, and my family? I hesitated. I wanted to tell them, but I was afraid that the conversation would immediately pivot to a loan request. So I sat there in the silence of my success, paying the bill and leaving a tip that was probably too large. Then my phone buzzed on the white tablecloth. It was my mother. I stared at the screen. It was almost 11 at night on the East Coast. A call at this hour meant one thing. I picked up, my heart already hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Alice," my mother said. Her voice was trembling, stripped of its usual passive-aggressive edge. "You need to come home. It is your father." The world tilted. The $15 million in my pending account suddenly felt like Monopoly money. It was worthless paper. "What happened?" I asked. Standing up so abruptly I knocked my napkin to the floor. "Is he okay?" "His heart," she sobbed. "He had chest pains after dinner. We are at the hospital now. The doctors are running tests. But Alice, he looks so gray. He looks so old. He keeps asking for you." That was the dagger. "He keeps asking for you." I did not ask for details. I did not ask if it was stable. I went into crisis mode. I was the fixer. I was the strong one. I told her I was on my way. I left the restaurant, booked the first red-eye flight to Pennsylvania, and packed a bag in 10 minutes flat. On the flight, I stared into the darkness at 30,000 feet, consumed by guilt. I had been so busy building my empire that I had missed the signs of my father's decline. I had been negotiating stock purchase agreements while his arteries were hardening. I made a silent vow right there in seat 4A. I would fix this. I had the resources now. I could hire the best cardiologists. I could pay for a private chef to cook heart-healthy meals. I could retire him comfortably so he never had to stress about money again. I could finally be the good daughter, not just the ATM. I landed in Westbridge at dawn and drove straight to the hospital, stopping only to buy a massive basket of fruit and expensive vitamins, plus toys for Brianna's kids. I needed to arrive with my hands full. It was my way of apologizing for my absence. When I got to the room, the crisis had de-escalated. The doctor, a tired-looking man with kind eyes, told me it was not a massive heart attack. It was a severe angina episode, a warning shot from a body that had been neglected. "He needs to change his lifestyle," the doctor said, looking at me and then at my mother. "Less stress, better diet, no heavy lifting. If he does that, he has plenty of time." I exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding since Seattle. He was going to be okay. We took him home that afternoon, and that evening, we had dinner. It was strange. In fact, it was the most unsettling meal I have ever eaten in that house. Usually, dinner at the Morris household is a monologue of complaints. Dad complains about the government. Mom complains about the neighbors. Brianna complains about her life. But tonight, the atmosphere was warm. It was terrified warmth. Maybe. But it felt genuine. They asked about me. "So, the company is really sold?" Dad asked, cutting a piece of grilled chicken carefully. "Lock, stock, and barrel?" "Yes," I said, feeling a flush of pride I had suppressed until now. "It is done. I am officially unemployed." "And the team?" Mom asked, pouring me more iced tea. "Did they get taken care of?" "They all have retention packages," I explained. "I made sure of that." "That is my girl," Dad said, smiling. "Always looking out for people." Then Brianna spoke up. She was sitting across from me, looking unusually put together. She wasn't wearing her usual sweatpants. She had a notebook next to her plate. "So, how does the payout structure work on something like that?" she asked. Her tone was casual, but her eyes were sharp. I paused. Brianna usually glazed over when I talked about business. "What do you mean?" "I mean, is it a lump sum?" she asked. "Or is it like payments over 5 years? And what about the tax hit? Is it capital gains or income tax?" I blinked. These were not the questions of a curious sister. These were the questions of someone who had been Googling tax law. "It is a lump sum," I said slowly. And yes, the taxes are significant. But I have a team handling the mitigation strategies. Right, right, Brianna said, nodding. She tapped her pen on the notebook. And have you thought about where you are going to park the liquidity? The market is volatile right now. T-bills are safe, but the yield is low. I looked at my mother. She was watching me closely, her fork hovering halfway to her mouth. I looked at my father. He was watching Brianna with a look of approval. I have a financial advisor, Bree, I said, trying to keep my voice light. We have a plan. Of course, she said, closing the notebook. I just want to make sure you are protected. It is a lot of responsibility. The dinner wound down, and we moved to the living room. The conversation drifted to safer topics. The weather, the neighbors, the kids. But I could not shake the feeling that I had just undergone a deposition disguised as a family meal. The questions had been too specific, too targeted, around 1 a.m. I woke up with a dry throat. The travel and the stress had dehydrated me. I got out of bed and crept into the hallway, intending to go to the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was dark, but I saw a sliver of light coming from the dining room. I heard low voices. I froze. I know I should have announced myself. I should have walked in and said hello, but something in the tone of the voices stopped me. It was the hushed, urgent tone of conspirators. I stepped closer to the doorframe, pressing my back against the wall. She definitely has the full amount access, Brianna's voice said. It was not the soft, concerned voice she had used at dinner. It was cold and businesslike. She admitted it was a lump sum. She is smart, my mother's voice replied. She will have defenses up. We cannot just ask. We have to frame it correctly. My heart began to pound, harder than it had when I got the call about Dad's heart. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. Then my father spoke. My father, who had just survived a heart scare, whose hand I had held in the hospital room hours ago. We need to present it as a moral obligation, he said, his voice steady and calculating. The question is not if she gives it. The question is, how do we divide it so it looks right for the family? I stood there in the dark, the hallway floor cold against my bare feet. The glass of water was forgotten, the warmth of the dinner, the concern in the hospital, the pride in their eyes. It all dissolved. I was not their daughter who had returned home to help. I was a pie, and they were already slicing me up. The next morning, the house was silent in a way that felt heavy. Like the air before a thunderstorm, I had barely slept. The conversation I had overheard in the hallway played on a loop in my mind, a jagged recording of betrayal. How do we divide it? Frame it as a moral obligation. I wanted to believe I had misunderstood. Maybe they were talking about an inheritance. Maybe they were talking about selling the house. But deep down, I knew better. I walked into the dining room around 9. The stage was set again, but the cast had expanded. My parents were there, sitting in their usual spots. Brianna was there, looking pale and tragically beautiful in a robe. And next to her sat Kyle, her husband. Kyle was a man who always looked like he was about to pitch you a multi-level marketing scheme. He wore a polo shirt that was slightly too tight and a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Good morning, Alice," my father said. His voice was robust. The frailty from the hospital visit had vanished, replaced by the sturdy authority of the head of the household. "Grab some coffee. We need to talk." I poured a cup of black coffee. My hands were steady, but my stomach was churning acid. I sat down at the only empty chair. Facing the 4 of them, it felt less like a breakfast and more like an intervention, or perhaps an arraignment. "We are so proud of you, Alice," my father began, leaning forward. "What you have achieved with that company, it is remarkable, truly." "Thank you," I said, guarding my tone. "But success," he continued, holding up a finger, "is not a solo journey. You stand on the shoulders of this family. We raised you. We supported you. We gave you the foundation to build that skyscraper." I thought about the scholarships I fought for, I thought about the $2,000 I gave up for Brianna's car. I thought about the years of silence while I built Root Nest, but I said nothing. And now that you have reached the summit, he said, you have a responsibility. You are the successful one, Alice, and a good sister, a good daughter, does not leave her family behind. My mother chimed in then. She placed her hand over Brianna's hand, which was resting on the table. It is about fairness, honey. You have to understand that God gave you certain gifts. You have the mind for numbers. You have the stamina. Brianna, she has other gifts. But the world is hard on people who do not have your kind of aggression. Aggression? I repeated. Drive, Mom corrected quickly. You have the drive. Brianna has had bad luck. It is not her fault that the economy is bad, or that her bosses have been unfair. It is just the way the cards were dealt. You were dealt a royal flush. She was dealt well. Less. It is only right that you share the pot. Brianna let out a small, choked sob. It was perfect timing. I have tried so hard, Alice, she whispered, looking down at her lap. You do not know what it is like. The credit card interest, the car payments. Kyle's business loan fell through because the bank didn't understand his vision. We are drowning. We wake up every day terrified. She did not mention what the business loan was for. She did not mention why they had credit card debt. She just presented the emotion, raw and undeniable, expecting me to fill in the checks. Kyle cleared his throat. Look, Alice, he said, using his serious man-to-man voice, family is a team. That is how I see it. You are the striker who just scored the winning goal. But we are the defense. We are the goalie. We are all on the field together. If you win, the team wins. It does not make sense for the striker to drive home in a Ferrari while the goalie takes the bus. I looked at him. Kyle had not held a steady job in 4 years. I was not sure what position he played on this metaphorical team, but I was pretty sure he was sitting on the bench eating oranges. Okay, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I hear you. I have already said I want to help. I am planning to set up some things for the kids' education, and I want to make sure Mom and Dad have the best health care. My father shook his head. That is piecemeal. Alice, that is charity. We are talking about structure. He reached under the table and pulled out a thick blue folder. He placed it in the center of the table with a heavy thud. I stared at it. The label on the front was printed in bold. Sans serif font. The Morris Family Distribution Plan. What is this? I asked, though I already knew. We took the liberty of drawing up a framework, Dad said, opening the folder. To save you the stress. You are busy. You have tax implications to worry about. This simplifies everything. He slid a sheet of paper toward me. It was a spreadsheet. I looked at the rows and columns, and the numbers made my breath catch in my throat. It was not a request for a loan. It was a liquidation plan for my life. The proposal outlined a family trust to be established immediately. The trust would hold 60% of my post-tax earnings. The trustees listed were Howard and Diane Morris, my parents. They would have full discretionary power over the funds for the betterment of the family lineage. Below that, there was a specific line item for Brianna, a stabilization grant of $2 million to be paid in cash within 30 days. Then there was a stipend for Kyle to seed new ventures. There were allocations for house renovations. There were allocations for travel. I looked up from the paper. My vision blurred for a second. Who wrote this? I asked. Did you hire a lawyer? We sat down and worked it out together, Mom said, smiling as if she were talking about planning a picnic. We know what the family needs better than any lawyer. It is fair. Alice, you still keep a very healthy amount for yourself, more than anyone needs, really, but this ensures that everyone is safe. You want me to sign over control of my money to you? I asked, my voice rising slightly. To a trust you manage? We are your parents, Dad said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming stern. We managed you for 18 years. Do you think we are not capable? Do you think we would steal from you? It is not about stealing, I said. It is about agency. This is insane. It is not insane, Brianna snapped, her tearful demeanor vanishing instantly. It is equitable. Why should you have $15 million sitting in a bank while I cannot even afford a new car? How is that justice? It is not justice, Brianna, I said. It is capitalism. I built the company. You did not. The room went cold. Kyle looked at the floor. Mom looked at Dad. There is one more thing, Dad said, leaning back in his chair. We have already spoken to your Aunt Sarah and Uncle Jerry, and the cousins in Ohio. My blood ran cold. You did what? We told them the good news, Mom said. We told them that you were going to do the right thing. We told them that you were setting up a fund to help everyone. Aunt Sarah is already looking into that hip surgery she has been putting off. She is so happy. Alice, she was crying on the phone, saying she always knew you were an angel. I felt the walls of the dining room closing in. They had not just planned a robbery. They had built a social prison. If I said no now, I would not just be the stingy sister. I would be the villain who snatched a hip replacement away from an old woman. I would be the monster who lied to the family. They had weaponized the entire extended family against me before I even knew there was a war. I looked at the spreadsheet again. Stabilization grant. Family trust. I looked at their faces. They were not waiting for my opinion. They were waiting for my signature. They did not look at me with love. They looked at me with expectation. I was not Alice Morris, daughter and sister. I was a harvest that was ready to be reaped. You are not asking me, I said quietly. We are guiding you, Dad corrected. No, I said. Standing up, my legs felt shaky, but I forced them to hold my weight. You are allocating me. You have already spent the money in your heads. You have carved me up like a Thanksgiving turkey. Alice, sit down, Dad commanded. You are being dramatic. I am not being dramatic, I said, backing away from the table. I am being audited. I turned and walked out of the room. I heard my mother calling my name, her voice shrill and demanding, but I did not stop. I needed air. I needed to get away from the binder and the expectations and the terrifying reality that my family had looked at my life's work and seen nothing but a lottery ticket they felt entitled to cash. I drove until the house was just a speck in my rearview mirror, and then I kept driving until I hit the interstate. I checked into a generic business hotel 3 towns over, the kind of place with beige wallpaper and air conditioning that smells like recycled dust. I needed a neutral zone. I needed a place that did not smell like my mother's pot roast or my father's expectations. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely insert the key card into the door slot. It took me 3 tries. Once I was inside, I threw my bag on the bed and sat in the ergonomic office chair by the window. I did not cry. I was past the point of tears. I was in a state of cold, vibrating shock. I felt like I had just walked away from a car crash where I was the only survivor. I pulled out my phone and dialed Evelyn Hart. Evelyn was the wealth management advisor who had guided me through the acquisition. She was 60 years old, wore tailored suits that cost more than my first car, and had a voice that sounded like gravel wrapped in silk. She had seen everything: divorces, bankruptcies, lottery winners who blew it all in a year. Alice, she answered on the first ring, you sound like you are underwater. What happened? They have a binder. Evelyn, I said, my voice cracking. They have a spreadsheet. They want to put 60% of the payout into a family trust that they control. There was a long silence on the other end. I heard the faint click of a pen against a desk. Ah, Evelyn said softly. The entitlement map. I warned you about this. But I admit, a 60% ask is aggressive even for the most delusional families. Usually, they start with a beach house or a loan for a restaurant. A trust? That is a hostile takeover attempt. They called it a distribution plan, I said. They talked about fairness. Brianna was crying about debt and pressure. Kyle was talking about the family being a team. Listen to me closely, Evelyn said. her tone shifting from sympathetic to surgical. Sudden wealth acts like a high-powered magnet. It pulls all the loose iron filings of a family's dysfunction to the surface. But Alice, healthy families do not present spreadsheets to their children. Desperate people do. They seemed desperate, I admitted. Brianna asked about the tax structure. She asked if the money was a lump sum. It felt rehearsed. That is because it was, Evelyn said. Alice, I need you to authorize me to run a comprehensive asset and liability search on your sister and her husband. Not just a credit check, a forensic sweep. If they are asking for millions, you have the right to know exactly what hole they are trying to fill. I hesitated. It felt invasive. It felt like a betrayal of privacy. But then I remembered the binder. I remembered the way my father had looked at me, not as a daughter, but as a signatory. Do it, I said. I spent the next 4 hours pacing the small hotel room, watching the sun move across the carpet. I drank 3 bottles of overpriced water from the minibar. I tried to read the news, but the words swam on the screen. When Evelyn called back, her voice was different. It was stripped of all warmth. It was the voice she used when she found a discrepancy in a contract. I am going to send you a secure file, she said, but I want to walk you through the highlights first. Are you sitting down? I am. Alice, your sister and brother-in-law are not just struggling, they are structurally insolvent. They are effectively running a personal Ponzi scheme. I felt the blood drain from my face. What do you mean? They have 7 credit cards maxed out to the limit, Evelyn recited, the papers rustling in the background. They are using cash advances from one card to pay the minimums on another. That is standard bad behavior. But here's the kicker. Kyle has a judgment against him from a failed contracting business 2 years ago. He owes suppliers over $80,000. And Brianna? She co-signed a high-risk business loan for him that went into default 6 months ago. They never told me about a loan, I whispered. They said it was medical bills. They said it was the economy. There is more, Evelyn said, and her voice dropped lower. There is a pending lawsuit, a civil suit. It looks like Kyle took a deposit for a construction job he never started. The plaintiffs are suing for fraud and breach of contract. The court date is in 3 weeks. I closed my eyes. The picture was coming into focus. The urgency, the heart scare that got me home, the perfectly set table, the pressure to sign immediately. They did not just want to be rich. They needed a bailout to stay out of court. They needed my $15 million to cover up a felony-adjacent mess they had created. It gets worse, Evelyn continued. If you give them this money directly, if you put it into a trust they control, the creditors can pierce that trust. You would not be securing their future. Alice, you would be feeding their lawyers and their debt collectors. And once you clear the ledger, they will do it again because they have not learned how to manage $10, let alone $10 million. So what do? I asked. Do I just let them drown? They are still my family. You build a firewall, Evelyn said. You do not give them a single cent of cash. Cash is oxygen to a fire. If you want to help, you pay the vendors directly. You set up educational trusts for the nieces and nephews with an independent trustee, me, or a bank. You pay the health insurance premiums directly to the provider, but you never, ever hand them a check. If they are drowning, you throw them a life preserver attached to a rope. You do not jump in the water with them. I looked at the phone. The screen was cracked slightly in the corner, a spiderweb of glass I had never bothered to fix. They are going to hate me, I said. They already resent you, Evelyn said brutally. Money just gave them a vocabulary for it. But Alice, you have to decide what you are. Are you their savior, or are you their sister? Because a savior pays the ransom, a sister helps them grow up. I hung up the phone and opened the file she had sent. It was all there in black and white. The liens, the late notices, the lawsuit filed in the county clerk's office. It was a dossier of chaos. The family distribution plan was not about fairness. It was a cover-up. They wanted to take the money I had bled for, the money I had sacrificed my 20s for, and use it to patch the holes in a sinking ship they had drilled themselves. And they were willing to guilt-trip me, manipulate me, and use my father's health as leverage to do it. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. It was the same feeling I got when I found a bug in my code. It was not emotional anymore. It was a problem that needed to be solved. I went into the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired. I looked pale. But my eyes were steady. I was not going to run away. I was not going to hide in this hotel room. I was going back to that house. But I was not going back to apologize. I was not going back to negotiate a lower percentage or to beg for their understanding. I was going back to dictate terms. I packed my bag. I put on my blazer, the one I wore when I closed the deal with the conglomerate. I checked out of the hotel as I drove back toward Westbridge. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the road. I rehearsed what I was going to say. I knew they would scream. I knew they would cry. I knew they would call me every name in the book. But for the first time in my life, I realized that no was not a rejection. It was a boundary, and boundaries are the only things that can survive a storm. I turned the car onto my parents' street, and I felt a strange sense of calm. I knew exactly what they were hiding now, and because I knew the truth, they could no longer hurt me with their lies. I pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a full minute. Watching the house, it looked the same as it had yesterday. The manicured lawn, the porch swing, the illusion of suburban peace. But now I saw it for what it was. It was a stage, and the actors inside were waiting for their producer to walk in and sign the checks. I had texted my mother from the road, asking to speak with her and Dad alone. I wanted to give them the dignity of a private conversation. I wanted to offer them a way out without an audience. But when I opened the front door, the air conditioning hit me like a wall of ice, and I saw that my request had been ignored. They were all there. Dad was in his armchair, the patriarch on his throne. Mom was pacing by the window. Brianna and Kyle were on the sofa, sitting so close they looked like a single. Anxious organism. The blue binder, the family distribution plan, was still on the coffee table, centered like a holy text. "We thought it was best if we did this as a family," Mom said before I could even take off my shoes. Her voice was tight, a warning shot. "Secrets are what tear families apart, Alice." The irony was so thick, I could taste it. I walked into the living room but didn't sit down. I stood by the fireplace, keeping distance between myself and the binder. "I asked for privacy," I said, my voice steady. "But if you want an audience, fine." "We just want a resolution," Kyle said, smoothing his polo shirt. "We are all tired. Alice, just sign the paperwork and we can order pizza. Celebrate." I looked at him, then I looked at my father. "I am not signing the plan," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't the silence of confusion. It was the silence of a vacuum sealing shut. "I am not putting 60% of my earnings into a trust I don't control," I continued, keeping my eyes on my father. "And I am not handing over a $2 million lump sum to Brianna." Brianna made a sound like she had been punched in the gut. "Alice, wait," I said, holding up a hand. "I am not finished. I am not abandoning you. I have drawn up a counter-proposal. It is non-negotiable. I didn't have a binder. I didn't have a spreadsheet. I just had my voice. First," I said, ticking off the points on my fingers, "I will fully fund a 529 education trust for the kids. It will be managed by a third-party fiduciary. It covers tuition, books, and housing for any accredited university they get into. They will graduate debt-free. That is a guarantee." Mom blinked, processing this. "Okay, that is good. But second," I interrupted, "I will pay for Dad's medical expenses directly to the providers. Any specialist, any treatment, any copay. I will put a credit card on file with the hospital network. You will never see a bill." Dad's jaw tightened. He didn't look relieved. He looked insulted. "Third," I said, turning to Brianna, "I will pay for a certified financial planner to work with you and Kyle for 2 years, and I will pay for any career coaching, certification courses, or trade school you want to attend. I will invest in your skills. I will invest in your future. I lowered my hand. That is the offer. Education, health, and career growth. Real support, not a handout. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Brianna stood up. Her face was flushed a deep, blotchy red. "You think I am a project," she spat. "That is what this is. You think I am some broken thing you need to fix with career coaching? Do you have any idea how condescending you sound? I don't need a life coach. Alice, I need a lifeline." "You need cash," I corrected her. "There is a difference." "I am your sister," she screamed, and the raw volume of it made me flinch. "I am drowning. I am waking up at 3 a.m. wondering if we are going to lose the house, and you are offering me a tutor? Do you think you are better than me because you can write code?" "Alice," Mom stepped in, her voice trembling with that weaponized disappointment she had perfected over 30 years. "If you loved this family, you wouldn't humiliate your sister like this. You are treating her like an employee. We are blood. Blood doesn't ask for receipts." "Blood shouldn't demand a ransom," I shot back. "Money has rotted you," Dad said. He didn't shout. He spoke with a cold, biblical finality. He looked at me with genuine disgust. "I look at you, and I don't see my daughter. I see a banker. You have forgotten your roots. You have forgotten who carried you when you were small." "I haven't forgotten anything," I said, feeling the heat rise in my chest. "I remember everything. I remember fixing laptops to buy my own car while you bought Brianna hers. I remember who paid for the roof repair last winter. I remember who sends the checks. And now you keep score," Kyle said. He stood up next to Brianna. Crossing his arms, his tone was softer, slimier. "Think about how this is going to look. Alice, the whole town knows you sold that company. Aunt Sarah knows. The cousins know. If word gets out that you let your own sister go under while you are sitting on $15 million, well, people talk. Reputations are fragile things." It was a threat. It was a polite, suburban threat. But it was a threat all the same. "Pay up, or we will destroy your image." I felt a strange calm wash over me. It was the calm of the executioner who knows the verdict is just, "You want to talk about reputations?" I asked, looking Kyle dead in the eye. "Okay, let's talk about the lawsuit." Kyle froze. The smirk slid off his face like wet clay. "Let's talk about the civil suit filed in the county court 3 weeks ago," I said, my voice cutting through the room. "The one where you are being sued for taking an $80,000 deposit for a construction job you never started. The one where they are accusing you of fraud," Brianna gasped. She looked at Kyle. But it wasn't a look of surprise. It was a look of panic. "And let's talk about the 7 maxed-out credit cards," I continued, turning my gaze to Brianna. "Let's talk about the business loan you co-signed that is in default. You aren't asking for a stabilization grant to invest in your future. You are asking for $2 million to keep Kyle out of court and to bury the evidence of your financial disaster before the sheriff shows up to seize your assets." I let the words hang there. I expected shock. I expected my parents to turn to Brianna and scream, "Is this true?" I expected my father, the moral pillar, to be horrified that his son-in-law was facing fraud charges. But that didn't happen. Mom didn't look at Brianna. She looked at the floor. Dad didn't look at Kyle. He looked at the wall. And in that split second, the floor dropped out from under me. "You knew," I whispered. It wasn't a question. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They weren't surprised. There was no gasping, no denial, no shock. "You knew about the lawsuit," I said, my voice rising. "You knew about the debt. That is why you called me home. That is why you staged the heart scare. You needed the money fast because the court date is coming up." "We were protecting you from the details," Dad said, finally looking at me. His eyes were hard, defiant. "We didn't want to burden you while you were closing your deal." "Protecting me?" I laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. You were trying to use me as a getaway car. You sat there and lectured me about roots and family values while you were plotting to use my hard-earned money to bail them out of a fraud charge. It was a misunderstanding, Brianna shrieked, tears streaming down her face now. Kyle didn't mean to take the money. The project got delayed. We just need to pay it back and it goes away. Why are you so cruel? Why can't you just help us? Because you lied, I shouted back. Because you looked me in the eye and told me it was for stability. You tried to manipulate me into a trust so you could drain it dry to fix your mistakes. She is your sister, Mom yelled, slamming her hand on the table. Does it matter why she needs it? She needs it. If you don't help, they lose everything. Is that what you want? Do you want to be right? Or do you want to have a family? I looked at them. I looked at my mother, whose face was twisted in defense of the lie. I looked at my father, who was willing to compromise his own morals to save his favorite child from consequences. They didn't care about the truth. They didn't care that Kyle had essentially stolen money from a client. They didn't care that Brianna had lied to my face. To them, the crime wasn't the fraud. The crime was my refusal to cover it up. They preferred the story where Brianna was the victim of a cruel world, and I was the cold-hearted banker. They would rather protect that narrative than face the reality that they had raised a daughter who couldn't function and a son-in-law who was a con artist. I see, I said quietly. The anger drained away, leaving only a deep, aching exhaustion. I finally see. Then sign the papers, Dad said, pushing the binder toward me again. Do the right thing, Alice. Be the bigger person. I looked at the blue binder. It wasn't a distribution plan. It was an invoice for their love, and the price was my integrity. No, I said. Alice? Mom started. I said no. I turned my back on them. I am leaving, and do not contact me until you are ready to talk about the truth, because I am done paying for the lies. I drove away from my parents' house with the radio off. But the silence did not last long. My phone, which was sitting in the cup holder, lit up, then it lit up again, and again. It was not a ring. It was a spasm. By the time I reached the highway, I had 14 missed calls and 23 text messages. They were not just from my parents or Brianna. They were from numbers I had not saved in years. Aunt Sarah, the one who supposedly needed hip surgery, sent a text that was a paragraph long. She said she was praying for my soul. She said that she heard I had made $20 million. Inflation works fast in the gossip mill. And that it broke her heart to hear I was letting my father die of stress just to save a few pennies. Then came Uncle Jerry. He left a voicemail that I made the mistake of listening to at a rest stop. His voice was thick with false joviality before it turned nasty. He told me that family is the only currency that matters and that I was going to die alone on a pile of gold if I did not wake up. He asked if I could loan him $15,000 for a truck. Almost as an afterthought to the insult, it was a coordinated attack. My family had activated the network. They had spun a narrative before I even had time to process the truth about Kyle's fraud. To the extended family, I was not the daughter who refused to be an accomplice to a crime. I was the ungrateful prodigal daughter who had struck it rich and slammed the door in the face of her suffering sister. The worst part was not the direct messages. It was the public theater. 2 days later, a friend from high school sent me a screenshot. It was a post from Brianna's Facebook page. It was a picture of her holding her 2 kids, looking despondent, with a caption that read, "It is sad how money changes people. You think you know someone, you think they are your blood, but then they get a little success and suddenly they forget where they came from. Hold your loved ones close, because apparently, love has a price tag for some people." She did not tag me. She did not have to. The comment section was a firing squad. People I grew up with, neighbors, old teachers, they were all chiming in. Stay strong. Bree, karma never misses. Some people are just rot inside. I felt sick. I felt like I was being hunted. I wanted to reply. I wanted to post the court documents proving Kyle was being sued for fraud. I wanted to post the screenshots of the threatening texts. I wanted to scream the truth from the digital rooftops, but I didn't. I knew that engaging was what they wanted. It would just be more fuel for the fire. I sat in my apartment in Seattle. I had flown back the next morning and felt a profound, crushing doubt. Was I the bad guy? Maybe I was cold. Maybe I should have just paid the $2 million. What was $2 million to me now? It was math, but to them, it was survival. Maybe I was being rigid. Maybe I was the monster they said I was. That was when I found Dr. Eris. She was a therapist who specialized in wealth psychology and family systems. I walked into her office looking like a ghost. I told her everything. I told her about the binder, the fake heart attack, the lawsuit, and the barrage of hate I was receiving. I expected her to tell me to find a middle ground. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and gave me a term that saved my sanity. "It is called an extinction burst," she said. I asked her what that meant. "Imagine a toddler screaming for candy," she explained. "If you say no, they do not just stop. They scream louder. They kick the floor. They throw things. They escalate the behavior because that behavior used to work. Your family is used to you being the provider. You have cut off the supply. They are not attacking you because they hate you. Alice, they are attacking you because they are panicking. They are ramping up the manipulation to the maximum level to see if you will crack." "So I am not crazy?" I asked. Tearing up? "No," she said. "You are just the first person in the generational line to install a lock on the door." She told me that the only way to win was not to play. I took her advice to the extreme. I did not just block them. I changed my phone number. I hired an assistant whose sole job was to filter my emails. If it was from a Morris, it went into a folder that I would only check once a month with my therapist present. I deactivated my social media accounts. I went dark. The silence that followed was terrifying at first. It felt like I had amputated a limb, but then, slowly, the phantom pain began to fade. I started to fill the space where the drama used to be. I needed something physical, something that required total focus so I could not think about Brianna's Facebook posts. I joined an indoor rock climbing gym. There is something clarifying about hanging 40 feet in the air by your fingertips. You cannot worry about your uncle's opinion when you are trying not to fall. I learned to trust my own grip. I learned that my muscles were stronger than I thought. I also adopted Nova. She was a rescue dog, a mix of shepherd and something scrappy. She had been found tied to a fence in the rain. When I first met her at the shelter, she was shaking. She did not trust anyone. It took me 3 weeks just to get her to eat from my hand, but the first time she laid her head on my lap, I understood something profound. She did not love me because I bought her a diamond collar. She did not love me because I paid her debts. She loved me because I showed up. She loved me because I was kind. It was the first pure relationship I had had in years. And then there was Graham. I met him at the climbing gym. I was struggling with a particularly difficult route, a 5.10 that required a dynamic lunge I could not quite stick. I fell, dangling on the rope, frustrated. "Try moving your left foot up to the volume before you jump," a voice called out from below. I looked down. He was holding the belay rope. He had messy brown hair and smile lines around his eyes. He did not look like the tech bros I was used to dating, the ones who wanted to compare stock portfolios on the first date. Graham was an environmental planner. He spent his days designing wetlands and arguing with city councils about drainage. He drove a 10-year-old Subaru that smelled like wet dog and pine needles. We went for coffee after the climb. I was braced for the inevitable question. "So, what do you do?" I had a rehearsed, vague answer ready because mentioning the sale usually changed the air in the room. "I am in transition," I said cautiously. "I just left my job in logistics." "Oh, nice," he said, taking a sip of his black coffee. "Logistics sounds stressful. I bet you are glad to be out. Do you like hiking? I found this great trail near Rainier." He did not ask about my salary. He did not ask about my exit. He did not care. We talked about rocks. We talked about dogs. He had a retriever mix. We talked about the best way to brew coffee. For the next 3 months, I lived a double life. In one life, my lawyer was fielding threats from Kyle's creditors and keeping tabs on the lawsuit that was slowly consuming my sister's life. In my other life, I was just Alice. I was the girl who was bad at dinos, but good at endurance. I was the girl who walked Nova in the rain. I remember one night, Graham and I were making dinner at his small apartment. It was nothing fancy, just pasta and cheap wine. We were laughing about something stupid, and I looked at him. He was chopping onions, humming a song. He did not need anything from me. If I lost every dollar tomorrow, he would still be standing there chopping onions. I felt a tightness in my chest loosen, a knot I had not realized was there. I realized that for 34 years, I had defined family as an obligation. I thought family was the people you owed your life to. I thought love was a debt you paid in installments of compliance and cash. But standing in that small kitchen, with a rescue dog sleeping on the rug and a man who liked me for my terrible jokes, I understood the truth. Family is not a vampire bat. It is not a place where you go to be drained. Real love does not require a credit check. Real love does not present you with a spreadsheet. I was still grieving the loss of my parents and my sister. That pain was a dull ache that would probably never go away completely. But I was no longer drowning in it. I had closed the door on the storm, and for the first time in my life, I was learning how to build a house that was warm on the inside. It had been exactly 365 days since I drove away from my parents' house. In that time, the silence had settled around me like a protective moat. I had not spoken to my father, I had not spoken to my mother, and I certainly had not spoken to Brianna or Kyle. I had, however, spoken to my lawyers. We had established an irrevocable education trust for my niece and nephew. I made sure the terms were ironclad. The money was locked in a vault that required 3 different keys to open, and none of those keys were in Brianna's hands. It paid the schools directly. It paid for uniforms, laptops, and field trips, but it did not dispense cash. It was a ghost fund. It existed to help the children, but as far as Brianna's lifestyle was concerned, it might as well have been empty. I thought I had found a new equilibrium. I was climbing 3 days a week. Graham and I were talking about moving in together. I was finally sleeping through the night without dreaming of spreadsheets and guilt. Then, on a Tuesday morning, the email arrived. It was from Brianna. The subject line was simply, "I want to fix this." The body of the email was disturbingly humble. She apologized for the shouting. She said she had been under immense pressure and had lashed out. She said she missed her sister. She proposed a family mediation session, not at the house, but with a professional counselor. She wanted to start over. 10 minutes later, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail, but her message was soft, pleading. "Just come talk to us, Alice, like adults, no binders, no demands, just us." It sounded like surrender. It sounded like they had finally realized that I was not coming back on their terms, and they were willing to accept mine. I wanted to believe it. Part of me, the part that was still 5 years old and wanted my dad to carry me on his shoulders, desperately wanted to believe it. So I agreed. But I did not agree to go to Westbridge. I told them we would meet at a mediation center in downtown Philadelphia. Neutral ground, security cameras in the lobby, a witness in the room. I thought I was being paranoid. I thought I was being overly cautious. Then I called Evelyn. "I need you to run a check," I told her. "I am meeting them on Friday. I need to know if the landscape has changed." Evelyn called me back 4 hours later. Her voice was tight. "Alice," she said, "do not go into that room thinking this is about an apology. This is a liquidity event." "What do you mean?" I asked, pacing my living room. "I pulled Brianna's recent activity," Evelyn said. "She and Kyle are in the final stages of closing on a commercial franchise agreement, a fast food franchise. It is a massive commitment. They have put down a non-refundable deposit they borrowed from a hard money lender." "Hard money?" I felt a chill. "Those are the guys who break kneecaps." "Exactly. The interest rates are predatory. But here's the kicker. Alice, the franchise agreement requires proof of liquid capital reserves of $500,000 to close. The deadline for that proof is this coming Monday. I looked at the calendar. The mediation was on Friday. They need a signature, I realized. They need me to pledge assets or transfer cash into an account they can show the franchisor. If they don't show that money by Monday, they lose the franchise, and they lose the deposit they borrowed. It gets worse, Evelyn said. I found something else. Your father has been making calls to local investors on Kyle's behalf. He has not signed anything illegal, thank God, but he has been using your name. My name? He has been telling people that the Morris family has silent backing from a tech sector windfall. He has been implying that you are a silent partner in this franchise deal to get people to lend Kyle money. He is using your reputation as collateral. I sat down on the floor. The apology email, the soft voicemail. It was all a timeline. They were not missing me. They were on a countdown. They had leveraged themselves to the hilt, based on the assumption that they could crack me open like a piggy bank if they just got me in a room and cried hard enough. They are trying to trap me, I whispered. They are trying to force your hand, Evelyn corrected. If you walk into that mediation and say no, they are going to tell you that you are destroying their last chance. They are going to tell you that the loan sharks are coming for Kyle. They are going to weaponize their own stupidity and drop it on your lap like a bomb. I felt the anger rising, but it was different this time. It was not the hot, confusing anger of a year ago. It was cold. It was precise. It was the kind of anger that fuels a hostile takeover defense. Thank you, Evelyn, I said. Send me the documents. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I did not buy a gift basket. I did not look at old photo albums to soften my heart. Instead, I opened my laptop and drafted a document. I called it the Morris Family Interaction Protocol. It was brutal in its clarity. It outlined exactly what I would pay for. The kids' school, Dad's heart medication, a specific amount for a verified career counselor. And then it listed the conditions. Condition 1, absolute financial transparency. I would see every bank statement, every credit card bill, every loan agreement. Condition 2, no more secrets. Condition 3, if anyone in the family used my name, my company's name, or my reputation to secure credit or assurance for a third party, all support would cease immediately and permanently. I printed 3 copies. I put them in a crisp manila folder. On Friday morning, I dressed like I was going to court. I wore a navy suit, heels that clicked sharply on the pavement, and no jewelry. I pulled my hair back. I looked in the mirror and I did not see the generous sister. I saw the CEO, who had sold a company for $15 million because she knew how to spot a glitch in the system. I drove to Philadelphia. The mediation center was in a glass high-rise. I took the elevator to the 20th floor. When I walked into the conference room, they were already there. The mediator, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Evans, sat at the head of the oval table. My parents were on one side. Brianna and Kyle were on the other. They looked terrible. Brianna had dark circles under her eyes that makeup could not hide. Kyle was tapping his foot nervously, a vibration that shook the table slightly. My father looked gray. When I entered, Brianna stood up. She looked like she was about to launch into the speech she had rehearsed. The tears, the I miss you, the emotional hook. Alice, she said, her voice trembling. Thank you for coming. We just want to be a family again. I didn't sit down. I didn't smile. I walked to the empty chair across from them and placed my folder on the table. I know about the franchise, I said. The room went dead silent. Brianna's mouth snapped shut. Kyle stopped tapping his foot. My father looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. I know about the hard money loan, I continued, my voice calm and level. I know about the $500,000 liquidity requirement due on Monday. And Dad, I know you have been telling lenders in Westbridge that I am backing this deal. Alice, wait, Dad started, holding up a hand. It is not like that. We just needed a bridge. Once the business is running, it will pay for itself. We were doing this to make you proud. To show you we can build something too. You were doing it to trap me, I said. You set this meeting up because you are 48 hours away from financial ruin, and you needed a signature. I looked at the mediator. She looked stunned. She clearly had not been briefed on the financial cliff my family was dancing on. I am not signing your liquidity proof, I said. I am not transferring $500,000, and I am not backing your loan. Then we lose everything, Kyle shouted, abandoning the nice guy act instantly. We lose the deposit. We lose the house. They will come after us. Alice, do you want that on your conscience? I didn't sign the loan. Kyle, I said. You did. I opened my folder. I slid the 3 copies of my protocol across the table. One for my parents. One for Brianna and Kyle. One for the mediator. This is not a negotiation, I said. This is the reality. If you want me in your life, if you want the education trust to stay active, if you want me to pay for Dad's heart pills, you sign this. It states that you will never use my name again. It states that I'm not your bank, and it states that if you try to manipulate me like this again, I disappear. Not for a year, forever. I stood there, watching them read the terms. I watched the realization sink in. They had built a trap for a soft-hearted sister, but a CEO had walked through the door. I knew they were desperate. I knew they were scared. But I also knew that if I gave in now, if I paid that ransom, I would never be free. I would be buying a ticket to a lifetime of blackmail. If you want me to be a resource, I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room, then you have to respect the source. You wanted a safe? Fine, I am showing you the lock. Now you have to decide if you are willing to learn the combination, or if you are going to keep trying to break it open with a hammer. The mediation room smelled like lemon polish and stale coffee. Dr. Evans, the mediator, sat at the head of the table with her hands clasped, looking like a referee waiting for the bell to ring. For the first 20 minutes, it felt like I had walked into a different reality. Brianna was crying, but they were quiet tears, the kind that looked genuine on camera. She looked at me across the mahogany table and apologized for everything. She apologized for the shouting match. She apologized for the nasty Facebook post. She said she had been drowning in postpartum depression and financial panic, and she had taken it out on the one person she should have trusted. Then my mother started weeping. She reached across the table, her hand hovering near mine, but not touching it, and told me that the house felt like a tomb without me. She said she missed my laugh. She said she missed her daughter. My father cleared his throat. He looked at me with wet, red-rimmed eyes and said the words I had wanted to hear since I was 6 years old. He said that he just wanted the family to be whole again. He said money was a curse if it tore us apart. For a moment, I felt my armor cracking. I felt that familiar pull in my chest, that desperate desire to believe that they loved me for me. I wanted to hug them. I wanted to erase the last year and go back to a time when things were simple, even if that simplicity was a lie. And then, just as I was about to soften, my father reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was not the thick blue binder from before. It was a sleek, one-page document. "We know we came on too strong with the trust fund idea," he said, sliding the paper toward me. "We were wrong. We should not have tried to control your money. That was disrespectful." I looked at the paper. "This is just a simple family agreement," he continued, his voice soothing. "It is much softer, no trusts, no control. Just a one-time transfer to help Brianna and Kyle clear the slate with this franchise deal. And then we never ask you for another dime. We just want to reset the clock." I looked at the number at the bottom of the page. $500,000. Immediate transfer. The armor snapped back into place. They had changed the packaging, but the product was exactly the same. They did not want a relationship. They wanted a transaction. I pushed the paper back across the table. I did not look at the number. I looked at Brianna. "I am not signing this," I said. My voice was calm, which seemed to terrify them more than if I had screamed. "I'm not wiring $500,000. I'm not clearing the slate. I am not clearing the slate. Alice, Mom started, her voice rising in pitch. Please, we just said we were sorry. And I accept your apology, I said. But an apology is not an invoice. You do not get paid for being sorry. I opened my own folder. I laid out my terms, the ones I had drafted in the silence of my apartment. Here is the future, I said. I have set up an educational trust for the kids. It is fully funded. It pays the schools directly. If they want to go to Harvard, it is paid for. If they want to go to trade school, it is paid for. But you cannot touch the principal. You cannot borrow against it. It is a ghost vault. Brianna blinked. She looked confused. I have also set up a direct billing account for Dad's cardiologist and his prescriptions. I continued. I will pay 100% of his medical costs, up to $50,000 a year, but the bills go to my accountant. No cash reimbursements. I took a breath. And for you, Brianna, I have prepaid for 2 years of career counseling and a financial certification course. I will pay for any degree you want to get. I will invest in your brain. But I will not invest in your debt. I leaned back. That is the offer. Education, health, skills, no cash, no transfers, no loans. The silence in the room was heavy enough to crush a lung. Brianna's face changed. The soft, apologetic sister vanished. Her eyes narrowed, and her mouth twisted into a sneer. So you still do not trust me, she spat. You think I am too stupid to handle money. You think I'm going to blow it on purses? I am trying to build a business. Alice, I am trying to build a future for my children, and you are offering me a textbook? I am offering you a ladder, I said. You want an elevator? We do not have time for a ladder. Kyle slammed his hand on the table. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. He stood up, his face purple. We need the cash today. Alice, today, not next week, not in a scholarship fund for 10 years from now. We need it right now. I looked at him. I looked at the sweat beading on his forehead. I looked at the way his hands were shaking. This was not just greed. This was terror. Why? I asked. It was a simple question. One word. Because we are family, Mom shouted. No, I said, locking eyes with Kyle. Why today? Why is it so urgent? Why does it have to be cash? Because of the franchise, Kyle yelled. We told you. The deadline is Monday. I called the franchisor. I lied. I had not called them, but I knew business. They said the deadline for the liquidity proof is flexible if you have a guarantor. I can sign as a guarantor without transferring cash. If this is just about the franchise, I can fix it with a phone call. Kyle froze. He looked at Brianna. Brianna looked at the floor. If I make that call, I said, and I sign as a guarantor, the problem is solved, right? They did not answer. Tell me the truth, I said. My voice was low. If I sign as a guarantor, why does that not help you? Brianna started to cry again. But this time it was ugly crying. It was the sound of a cornered animal. Because we already spent the deposit, she sobbed. The air left the room. What? I asked. We borrowed the deposit from a private lender, Kyle whispered, collapsing back into his chair. A hard money loan, short-term, high interest. We used it to pay off the old credit card debt and the legal fees for the fraud suit. We thought once we got the franchise, we could use the business loan to pay back the hard money guy. But you need the $500,000 to get the business loan, I said, connecting the dots. And you do not have it, so you are sitting on a high-interest loan that is about to default, and you have no franchise to show for it. If we do not pay the hard money lender by Monday, that triggers a confession of judgment. They can seize everything, the house, the cars. They can garnish our wages for 20 years. It triggers a lawsuit that we cannot stop. I looked at my parents. They were not looking at me. They were looking at the wall. You knew, I said. They are going to lose the house, Alice, Dad said softly. Where will the grandkids live? We just need you to cover the gap. You have $15 million. This is a drop in the bucket for you. Why do you have to be so rigid? You can save them with a signature. You want me to pay off a loan shark, I said. You want me to be the clean money that washes their dirty money, and if I do it once, what happens next year? What happens when the franchise fails because they have no operating capital? We will figure it out, Brianna screamed. Just help me this one time. Do not let me drown. I looked at her. I looked at the sister I had protected on the playground. I looked at the sister I had bought a car for, and I realized that if I paid this money, I would not be saving her. I would be confirming that she never had to face a consequence in her life. I would be buying her destruction. No, I said. Alice, Mom shrieked. You are killing this family. No, I said again, standing up. I am the only one trying to keep it alive. You are the ones trying to sell its organs. I picked up my folder. I looked at the mediator, who was staring at us with wide eyes. From this moment on, I said, my voice steady and cold, all communication goes through Evelyn Hart. If you need money for the kids' school, call her. If you need money for Dad's heart pills, call her. If you want career coaching, call her. I looked at my father. But if you ever ask me for cash again, or if you ever try to guilt me into fixing a mess you created with your own lies, the trust fund closes, the medical payments stop, everything stops. You cannot do that, Dad said. You are our daughter. I am your daughter, I said. I am not your insurance policy, and I am certainly not your accomplice. I walked toward the door. Kyle was sobbing into his hands. Brianna was screaming that she hated me. Mom was wailing. I put my hand on the doorknob. I turned back one last time. I am not closing this door because I hate you, I said, and I felt a tear finally slide down my own cheek. I am closing it because I finally understand. On the other side of this door is not a home. It is a machine designed to drain my blood, and I am all out of blood. I walked out. I walked past the receptionist. I walked out of the building and into the sunlight of Philadelphia. I took a deep breath. The air smelled like exhaust and pretzel vendors, but to me, it smelled like freedom. 6 months later, I received a letter in the mail. The return address was unfamiliar, but the handwriting on the envelope was childish and blocky. I opened it. Inside was a drawing. It was done in crayon. It showed a stick figure of a girl with a backpack standing in front of a big building that looked like a school. There was a yellow sun in the corner. On the back, in messy letters, it said, "Thank you for my new school, Aunt Allie." I love the library. It was from my niece. There was no note from Brianna. No note from my parents. I heard through Evelyn that they had lost the house and moved into a rental. I heard that Kyle was working 2 jobs to pay off the settlement. They were struggling. They were angry. They probably still told everyone who would listen that I was the villain. But I looked at that drawing. I looked at the yellow sun. I smiled. I pinned the drawing to my refrigerator, right next to a photo of me and Graham and Nova on top of a mountain. I had not saved the adults. You cannot save people who do not want to be saved. You can only interrupt their fall. But I had put a shield around the children. I had made sure that the next generation had a library instead of a debt, and as I stood there in my quiet kitchen, drinking my coffee, I realized that was enough. I had lost the family I wanted, but I had protected the future I believed in, and that was a price worth paying. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Are you Team Alice, or do you think family should always come first? If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that subscribe button so we can share this journey with even more people.